It's a plan to build Australia's future with more homes, new investments in skills and education, competition reforms and a future made in Australia.
Well, Mark, we've just seen the fourth federal budget from the Albanese government, and it was sort of the budget we weren't expecting to see.
Well, normally you would say that about a budget, wouldn't you, that there are things in the budget that you don't expect to see. But this budget itself we weren't expecting to see because the government, of course, was going to go to an election without having this budget. Then there was Cyclone Alfred, and of course, we find this budget having been somewhat hastily prepared by the government, and presumably it'll be a pretty hasty response from the opposition when they come out a couple of days hence.
Absolutely. And I guess one of the other surprises we saw today was some new tax cuts. Yeah. So that will be for every taxpayer. It'll be a couple of $100 a year rolling out over 2 years. What do you make of that? Was that a bit of a surprise?
I think it is a surprise. We haven't really had much in the way of discussion about that in the sort of public framing of this budget. We knew there was the $8.5 billion Medicare boost, and there was going to be, more money in the PBS to keep prescription medicines down, all these sorts of things. But we hadn't heard anything about income tax cuts. The government calls them modest. They are actually quite modest, and it says you've got to take its sort of 3 increments of tax cuts together, because if you don't, you're talking about some pretty insignificant amounts of money, at least as a sort of a single year benefit. But I think it has been designed to wrong foot the opposition. I mean, the opposition wouldn't obviously want to be coming out with its own tax cuts, but if it tries to go further than the government, it's going to have to say where that money's coming from.
Absolutely. And do you think it will, given they are modest tax cuts, do you think it will make a difference to households, particularly as we head into a federal election?
Well, I think it sends a signal, right? I mean, Chalmers is trying to send this signal that the economy has turned the corner. Yes, there's all these dark clouds in the international environment, what's happening with Trump and the possibility of a trade war. It's a very unpredictable world, and it feels much more unstable than it has for many years. But he's also selling this message that there's something exceptional about Australia and that Australia is in a much better position. The economy's turned the corner. He talks about we're going to get to this soft landing that we have been aiming for. It's a pretty positive story. I just think there are two things about it. There's the positive and the negative, the positive local story and then the negative international story. And I think whichever one of those two things resonates with voters may go a long way to deciding whether this budget is convincing or it isn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing we saw in there was a very modest increase to the number of public service staffing levels. So just over 3,000 extra jobs in there. Now, this is no doubt going to be seized upon by the coalition. They've been talking about a bloated public service, whereas the Labor government says it's in the right place. Where do you think this leaves us, given we're probably weeks, maybe days from a federal election being called?
Well, I think the two sides, really reflect the different philosophies of what government does, and also the fact that there's no Liberal senator in the ACT anymore, nor any real prospect of one. So you've got the coalition being pretty unrestricted in its sort of attacking of the public service. There's a bit of Trumpism in there, the kind of government efficiency approach that Dutton sort of embarked on quite quickly after Musk was appointed in the US to do the same sort of thing. And there's Labor sort of talking about services and public service jobs and so forth. So, these are two different perspectives. I don't think voters really care about aggregate numbers. I do think they care about the idea of a public service that's bloated and inefficient, but I don't think we're really talking about that in any meaningful way.
And what's your prediction? When do you think we're going to be heading to the polls?
I think we're only days away. I think it's the weekend coming. I think
That it'll be announced?
Yeah, I think that a visit to the Governor-General could well happen this coming Sunday.